Thank you to DistroKid for sponsoring this video and supporting my channel. So today we're going to be breaking down a beat that I made in the style of Bazzi. Now, if you don't know who Bazzi is, he's a pop artist, and what I love about him is that he's always singing and rapping over these hybrid beats that contain like these pop chords and melodies over hard-hitting trap drums, and that is in fact my favorite genre or subgenre to create. Before we get started, if you're at the beginning of your production journey or if you just need a little bit more clarity, then don't forget to download my free 6-step guide to producing a professional beat. This is a simple PDF that you can use as a roadmap to get started making beats of your own without breaking the bank in as little as 1 hour. So if you want that free guide, all you have to do is click the link down below. Now, this beat really started with this chord progression here that I created inside of Chords. Now, the patch by itself sounded like this. And all I basically did was I added an EQ to kind of just round things out and take out the high and the low end. Now from there, I knew that I wanted some sort of guitars integrated into the entire thing. And I started by adding this single note guitar. It pedaled the exact same note for the majority of the chord progression, which was an E. And then I changed it last minute to match with the chord progression that I had programmed. Now, if I take everything off, this is what that guitar sounds like. And basically all I did here was I added a guitar rig to add a bit of texture and amp simulation. Then I added this new plugin here called Murda Melodies. I don't even know if this is actually from Murda Beats, but I got it from the Slate All Access bundle. And it has a ton of control and parameters that you can mess around with here, but I spread it out a little bit. And then I also added a bit of rhythmic delay. Last but not least, I also sent this guitar to a room reverb send. Now I did a send as opposed to an insert because I didn't want to drown it out in reverb. I still wanted to hear those transients from the guitar, but have that reverb kind of tucked in the background. Now, if I were to kind of play that for you, so it definitely adds a little bit of flavor, and once we combine that in with the keys, this is what we have. And again, it plays that same note, and it's not till the last chord that we go back down to match the chord progression. Now, once I had that in place, I like to kind of almost create some sort of a basic skeleton within the melody section, and then immediately move on down to the drums to kind of get a good feel and a good pocket, and then come back up to finish everything else. So from there, what I basically did was I added a snare, and then I added a hi-hat part. Now, the snare, I believe I didn't do anything to it. Oh, I did, actually. Lies. I added a low-cut filter here, about 100 hertz, and then I also added a Valhalla room, just to kind of add a little bit of reverb. This one I added to the snare because I wanted that to be a part of the sound. And then for the hi-hat, I basically just kind of added 8th notes, I'm sorry, and then added some rolls here and there to kind of spice things up. And again, just a kind of a low-cut filter to leave some room for the 808 and the kick a little bit later. But together now, these 4 elements sound like this. Now, a good way to make your drums stand out is to not leave them as basic. And what I mean is that you should be adding different textures, maybe layering your snares or your claps to kind of add different effects. So if you take a look here, I added a couple of different things. First is I added this little perk loop that added a little bit more movement to the entire thing. It's almost like reverse hits. And then from there, I added a snap on every other hit with a lot of reverb. On this one, I believe I used the Valhalla Vintage Verb, I believe it is. Super, super spacey reverb, just all the way out to 100% mix. And we get something like this. From there, I wanted a lot more impact in those areas where we had the snap. So I decided to double this up with a clap, also with a bunch of reverb. So once we had that clap in, it sounds a little something like this. Now, if you notice on that clap, I also have a vintage verb, so about halfway percentage-wise on the mix. But then I also added an echo boy to add some quarter note delays, filtering out the low and the highs. and then quite a bit of feedback here. So once we add that in, it sounded really nice, but I wanted some sort of like build up into that clap. So what I did is I basically took this clap, I reversed it, added reverb, reversed it again, and then that's how I came up with this little clap riser, and that sounds like this. Now, last but not least, of course, we had the kick. I also added in some live hats that I played manually using Easy Drummer 2. And then, of course, added the kick, added some crashes. But now our drums with the guitar and the keys sound like this. Now, one more thing that I'll point out here is that a lot of times when I'm making beats, I like to make sure that my drums feel like they are in the same room. Obviously, this is not a live drum kit. We have a lot of synthetic sounds and, you know, process sounds, but still, I want it to sound like they're cohesive, and an easy way to do that is to take all your drums and then send them over to a drums bus, and then from here, use a send to send a signal, a parallel signal, over to some sort of reverb, which in my case here is the Verb Suite's classic plugin. I'm gonna play it without, and then with, you'll see the difference that it's kind of making here. And then once we add that in. But okay, moving back up to the melodies, here's a couple things that I did here to kind of make this sound a lot bigger. I duplicated that chord progression, the MIDI chord progression, and I added that to a patch with a pad. So once we add that in, we get this. I'm gonna take it off real quick. Just a lot more empty. And then what I also did is I brought in a pluck sound, and I basically took the chord progression, the chords, and I chopped them up into smaller bits. And then I added a higher pitched pluck just to kind of accentuate the beginning of each chord. You can kind of barely hear it, but it makes a difference in the mix, I think. Now, last but not least, we had two more elements here that kind of really just spice things up the way that I wanted it to. And number one was an ARP. Now, the ARP, it's basically playing the exact same chord progressions, but obviously just an ARP. And then what I did to kind of make this sound a little bit wider is that I recorded the chords from the keyboard, but on my guitar. And then I basically processed them by sending them over to Archetype, Corey Wong. I've showed this off a couple of different times, but I basically turned on the tuber, which is kind of like, you know, distortion. And then on the EQ here, I bumped up 8K kilohertz area, and I believe that was it. I recorded those twice in pan 1 hard left and 1 hard right. If you listen to these by themselves, they sound like this. Add in that main lead, pedaling that same note. Add in the keys, add in the pad, the pluck, the ARP. This is a melodic section. And then, you know, obviously you have the drums, but let's talk about the 808 here real quickly. So the 808, I basically programmed using sample 1, but what I want you to notice here is that it does a couple of different glides, which are, you know, almost synonymous with FL Studio. And the way that I did that is you want to make sure that your attack, decay, and release are all down on the pitch, the amp, and then turn on mono, turn on glide, and then anywhere from like 60 to 70, I feel like works really well for this little parameter here. And then all you have to do is basically on the piano roll, make sure the notes overlap a little bit. So if you take a look here, they're kind of overlapping. And that's how you kind of get those slides. So for the 808 itself, I added a track spacer and then use the kick to send it over. So every time the kick hits, it kind of ducks out all of those frequencies from the 808. It's kind of like sidechaining, but way more sophisticated. I've talked about this plugin before, but I 100% think this should be in your toolbox. Take a listen here. So you see how it's kind of like ducking out those frequencies, kind of carving them out. Now, from there, I just added a bit of a sausage fattener to kind of beef things up. So then if we add that 808 with the drums, this is the cadence that we're dealing with. Now that was the main part of the beat, but what I think really makes a beat special is the arrangement. This is a part where you get to be a little bit more creative in a different way and kind of almost guide the listener's attention based on what you add or what you don't add. Now, before I show you what I did arrangement-wise and then play you the full beat, I did want to take a moment to thank the sponsor for this video, DistroKid. So I've talked about DistroKid before. They are the digital distributor that I've been recommending to my clients and using for my own beat tape releases for a few years now because of how affordable and value-packed their subscription is. But today I want to talk to you about their latest service called DistroVid. With this new service, musicians are now able to distribute their own music videos to streaming platforms in the same effortless way as with their music and keep 100% of their earnings. The service is $99 a year for unlimited uploads in high def, including 4K, with the ability to also add custom thumbnails and dictate your own release dates. What's really cool is that DistroVid members also get included in Vivo, and this is important because Vivo also lets people watch your music videos on different platforms like Roku, smart TVs, and Comcast, so you can further expand your reach. If you want to learn more about DistroVid or sign up to take advantage of this new service, then make sure to check out the link down below. So in Studio One, we have this little handy arranger track here that basically lets us label our different sections of our beat and then move them with ease, copy them over, a bunch of different cool things. But if you take a look here on my intro, I basically had the keys, the pad, and then the lead guitar part. Now it comes back in the verse here, but what I did was I basically automated the filter of the EQ curve on that guitar to kind of create more of a subtle version that's kind of tucked into the mix, and then I bring it back into the chorus. Now as far as the verse goes, I took off the plucks, I took off the arp, I took off all the strum guitars. Now for this pre-chorus here, I did drop out that lead guitar part and I brought in the electric strummed guitars. However, I made them less processed, less distorted, and they sound like this. As opposed to just to kind of give it a bit of a different texture. Now, the other thing that I did here is I substituted that 808 with a more kind of growly underwater bass, which sounds like this. Now, I also took out the kick and I took out the snap and the perk loop to kind of create a little bit more room before bringing everything back into the chorus. But yeah, that was the whole beat. Now, let me play you the whole thing so you get an idea of the entire thing, but let me know your thoughts down below. But there you have it. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this beat. Once again, thank you to DistroKid for sponsoring this video. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you on the next one.